The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only sound that mattered, a delicate symphony conducted by the city's elite. For Marigold Penrose, it was the soundtrack of her exhaustion. In the opulent dining room of Ethelgard, she was invisible, a ghost in a crisp black uniform, existing only to fill a glass or clear a plate. But tonight, that invisibility would be shattered. The man at table 7, Grayson Reese, a titan of industry whose face was plastered on business magazines, had just watched a single drop of crimson wine, a priceless Chateau Margaux, fall from her trembling hand onto his immaculate white cuff. And his response would echo far beyond these hallowed walls. Ethelgard wasn't just a restaurant, it was a stage. Perched on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking the glittering expanse of downtown, it was where deals were sealed, alliances forged, and fortunes made or lost over plates of meticulously crafted cuisine. For the patrons, it was a symbol of their arrival. For the staff, it was a tightrope walk over a canyon of impossible expectations. Marigold Penrose knew the tightrope well. For 6 months, she had balanced her architectural studies during the day with grueling 8-hour shifts at night. Every dollar earned was a small victory against the mountain of her mother's medical bills. Her life was a carefully constructed Jenga tower of responsibilities, and the slightest tremor could bring it all crashing down. Tonight, the tremor had a name: Grayson Reese. She had recognized him the moment he'd walked in, flanked by 2 other men in severe dark suits. Reese was different. He moved with a predatory stillness, his presence sucking the air out of the room. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. They swept over the dining room, not with appreciation, but with assessment, as if he were calculating the value of every soul within it. Marigold had served powerful people before, but Reese radiated an authority that was absolute, a cold gravity that bent the world to his will. Her section was his table. Her hands, usually steady, felt clammy. Just another table, she told herself, her breath catching in her throat. Breathe! For 2 hours the service was flawless. The men spoke in low-clipped tones about mergers and market fluctuations. Marigold moved around them like a phantom, refilling water, presenting dishes, and clearing plates with practiced efficiency. She was on the final pour of the 2nd bottle of Chateau Margaux, a wine that cost more than her monthly rent when it happened. One of the other men, a portly executive named Mr. Gable, made a sudden gesture with his hand, bumping her arm just as she tilted the bottle. It was a minuscule jolt, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. A single, perfect ruby droplet escaped the neck of the bottle. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before landing with a soft splash on the stark white fabric of Grayson Reese's French cuff. Silence. The entire table froze. Mr. Gable's face went pale, his hand retracting as if burned. The 3rd man stared wide-eyed at the offending red mark, but Marigold's eyes were locked on Grayson Reese. He didn't move. He simply lowered his gaze to his wrist, observing the crimson stain as it blossomed on the pristine cotton. He studied it for a long, agonizing moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he lifted his eyes to meet Marigold's. There was no anger in them, no shouting, no overt fury. There was something far worse, a profound, chilling disappointment, the kind a god might feel upon discovering a flaw in his creation. "Do you know how much this shirt costs?" he asked, his voice soft, yet it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a shard of glass. Marigold's throat was dry. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry. It was an accident." "Mr. Gable." "I did not ask for an explanation," Reese interrupted, his voice dropping even lower. "I asked a question." "No, sir, I don't." "Of course you don't," he said, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. He looked at the stain again. This shirt was tailored by hand in Milan. The wine is a 1982 vintage. Together their value would likely cover your salary for the entire year. But value is not the issue. The issue is perfection. The issue is standards. He leaned forward slightly, pinning her with his gaze. I demand perfection from my employees, from my investments, from my surroundings. You have failed to meet that standard. You have introduced a flaw into my evening. Marigold felt the blood drain from her face. Sir, I will cover the cost of the dry cleaning immediately. I will speak to my manager. We can dry cleaning. He let out a short, humorless laugh. You believe this is about money, about a simple stain. He gestured to the floor beside his chair. Kneel. The word hung in the air thick and poisonous. Marigold blinked, certain she had misheard. The other two men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Gable looked like he was about to be sick. I'm sorry, what did you say? Marigold whispered. I said, Grayson Reese repeated his voice now, like chips of ice. Kneel and apologize, not for the wine. Apologize for your incompetence. Show me that you understand the gravity of your failure. A wave of nausea washed over Marigold. All around them the hum of the restaurant continued, but at their table a black hole had opened up. She could feel the eyes of nearby diners starting to turn towards them, drawn by the palpable tension. Her manager, a stern man named Mr. Dubois, was already gliding towards their table, his face a mask of concern. Kneel. The word was an insult beyond measure. It wasn't about a mistake. It was about humiliation. It was a demonstration of power, a king demanding fealty from a peasant. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest. Her father, a proud man who had taught her to stand tall, no matter the hardship, would be ashamed. Her mother, who fought her illness with quiet dignity every single day, would be heartbroken. She looked at Grayson Reese, at his perfectly sculpted face, his cold, empty eyes, and saw the casual cruelty of a man who had never been told no. A man who believed his wealth gave him ownership over the dignity of others. Her own eyes, a startlingly clear blue, hardened. Her chin lifted. Her hands, which had been trembling, became perfectly still. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Mr. Dubois arrived at the table, his face slick with sweat. Mr. Reese, sir, is there a problem? I assure you. Whatever it is, the restaurant will... Reese held up a hand, silencing him without a glance. His entire focus was on Marigold. An unholy light flickered in his eyes. He seemed almost intrigued. No, he repeated, as if tasting the word. No. Marigold said again, her voice stronger this time. I will not. Mr. Dubois looked at Marigold in sheer panic. He opened his mouth to fire her on the spot, to do anything to appease the billionaire demigod at his table. But before he could speak, Grayson Reese slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He was taller than Marigold had realized, an imposing figure of tailored charcoal wool. He adjusted the now stained cuff of his shirt, his movements deliberate. He looked from Marigold's defiant face to her manager's terrified one. It seems you have an employee with a misplaced sense of pride, Dubois, he said calmly. See that she is removed, from my sight and from your payroll. With that, he dropped his napkin onto the table, turned and walked out of the restaurant, his two associates scrambling to follow in his wake. The entire dining room was now watching. Marigold stood frozen, the heavy, expensive wine bottle still in her hand. The silence was deafening. Then Mr. Dubois turned to her, his face a contorted mask of fury and fear. Get out, he hissed, his voice trembling. You're fired. Get your things and get out of my restaurant. Now. The walk from the 60th floor to the staff locker room in the basement felt like a descent into the underworld. Marigold moved in a daze, the hissed words of Mr. Dubois ringing in her ears. Each step was heavy, laden with the weight of what had just happened. She could still feel the phantom heat of dozens of eyes on her back, some pitying, some scornful, all judging. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit locker room, she changed out of her uniform with numb fingers. The crisp black and white felt like a costume from another life, a life that had ended just 10 minutes ago. She packed her few belongings into her worn backpack, a dog-eared textbook on structural engineering, a half-eaten protein bar, a framed photo of her smiling mother. Her co-worker, a kind-hearted woman in her 50s, named Maria, found her sitting on the bench, staring at the concrete floor. "I heard what happened," Maria said softly, sitting beside her. "That man, he's poison. What you did, Marigold, standing up to him, that took guts." Marigold finally looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "It took my job, Maria. What am I going to do now? My mum's treatment, the rent." The Jenga tower was not just trembling, it was collapsing. "You'll find something else," Maria insisted, squeezing her shoulder. "You're smart, you're strong. This place, it's just a job. Don't let that monster take anything else from you." But as Marigold stepped out of the building's service entrance into the chilly night air, his power felt inescapable. The skyscraper housing Ethelgard was owned by a subsidiary of his corporation. The taxi that sped past probably ran on fuel from a company he had a majority stake in. Grayson Reese didn't just exist in the world, he owned pieces of it. The long subway ride back to her small apartment in Queens was a blur of flickering lights and anonymous faces. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind. The spilled wine, the cold demand, her refusal. Had she been foolish, pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Kneeling for 30 seconds, as vile as it would have been, might have saved her job. It might have kept the electricity on, kept the prescriptions filled. But then she remembered the look in his eyes, the utter lack of humanity, the expectation of her submission. Kneeling would have broken something inside her, a part of her spirit she knew she could never get back. She had chosen dignity over security, and now she had to live with the consequences. Her apartment was a tiny one-bedroom she shared with the ever-present scent of her mother's herbal teas. She found her mum, Onja Penrose, asleep in her armchair, a book resting on her lap. Anya's illness was a degenerative condition that attacked her nervous system, causing her chronic pain and fatigue. Some days were good, others were unbearable. But through it all, Anya retained a quiet grace that was Marigold's anchor. Seeing her mother's peaceful face, a fresh wave of guilt washed over Marigold. She had failed her. She quietly made her way to her own room, a space barely large enough for a bed and a drafting table covered in blueprints for her university projects. She sat at the table, staring at the intricate lines of a bridge. She was designing a structure of strength and balance, everything her own life was not. Sleep offered no escape. She dreamt of falling, of cold, stormy eyes, and the word kneel echoing in a vast, empty chamber. The next morning, the reality was even harsher. The first call was from the pharmacy. Her mother's primary medication was ready for pickup, and the copay was $400. The second was an email from her university's bursar's office, a gentle reminder that her tuition installment was overdue. The third was a text from her landlord, asking when he could expect this month's rent. The walls of her small world were closing in. She spent the entire day in a frantic, soul-crushing online job search. Waitress, hostess, barista, cashier. She sent out 24 applications, each one a small prayer into the void. The replies, if they came at all, were automated rejections. The job market was brutal, and a high-end restaurant like Ethelgard on her resume might now be a liability. What if Mr. Dubois blacklisted her? What if the story of the defiant waitress spread? By late afternoon, she was nursing a single cup of tea, trying to ignore the gnawing pit of despair in her stomach. Her phone buzzed, displaying a number she didn't recognize, a sleek, corporate-looking Manhattan area code. Probably another telemarketer. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and a third time. With a sigh of irritation, she answered. "Hello. Am I speaking with Ms. Marigold Penrose?" The voice on the other end was female professional and crisp. "Yes, this is she." "Ms. Penrose, my name is Genevieve. I am calling from the office of Mr. Grayson Reese at Reese Capital. Mr. Reese requests your presence at our headquarters tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." Marigold froze the phone, feeling like a block of ice against her ear. Reese Capital. Grayson Reese. It couldn't be. Was this a sick joke? Was he going to sue her for the cost of the shirt? Why Marigold managed to ask her voice, barely a whisper. "I am not at liberty to discuss the purpose of the meeting," Genevieve replied coolly. "A car will be waiting for you at your address at 8 a.m. Please be prompt." Before Marigold could protest or ask another question, the line went dead. She stared at her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. What did he want? To gloat, to humiliate her further in a more private setting. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse to block the number and disappear. But another more pragmatic voice cut through the fear. She had nothing left to lose. He had already taken her job. What more could he do? And beneath the fear, there was a spark of something else. A burning, defiant curiosity. She had looked the devil in the eye and said no. Now the devil was summoning her to his lair. She had to know why. The next morning, Marigold stood on the curb outside her modest apartment building, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black skirt, a white blouse, and a worn but clean blazer. It felt like armor, but a flimsy suit of it against the forces she was about to face. At precisely 8:00 a.m., a black sedan so sleek and silent it seemed to absorb the light and sound around it pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man in a black suit and sunglasses, stepped out and opened the rear door for her without a word. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet power. As the car glided away from her familiar neighborhood and towards the steel and glass canyons of Manhattan, Marigold felt like she was crossing a border into a foreign country. Reese Capital headquarters was a monument to its founder's ego. A towering spire of obsidian glass that clawed at the sky, it was designed to intimidate, to project an aura of unassailable dominance. The lobby was a cavernous space of white marble and minimalist art, where people moved with a hushed, nervous energy. Marigold gave her name to the receptionist, who regarded her with a flicker of polite confusion before her eyes widened in recognition. Clearly a memo had been circulated. "Ms. Penrose, of course. Mr. Reese is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to the penthouse level." The private elevator was a small mirrored cube that shot upwards with breathtaking speed. Marigold's ears popped as the floor numbers raced past. When the doors opened, they didn't open into a reception area, but directly into Grayson Reese's office. And it wasn't an office. It was a kingdom. The space occupied the entire top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a 360-degree godlike view of the city. The furniture was sparse and modern, each piece a work of art. The only personal touch was a large, abstract painting on one wall, a chaotic swirl of dark blues and violent splashes of crimson. Grayson Reese was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city he ruled. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater and black trousers. He looked less like a CEO and more like a philosopher, king contemplating his domain. He didn't turn around. "Do you know what the most valuable commodity in the world is, Miss Penrose?" He asked, his voice calm and resonant in the quiet room. Marigold stood just inside the elevator, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I would have thought it was money," she replied, her own voice steadier than she expected. He finally turned a faint, knowing smile on his lips. "A common misconception. Money is a tool. Power is a result. The most valuable commodity is integrity. True, unbendable integrity. It's so rare, it's almost priceless." He walked towards his desk, a massive slab of polished obsidian that mirrored the building itself, and gestured to one of the chairs opposite it. "Please sit." Marigold hesitated for a moment before taking a seat. She felt like a mouse being invited to dine with a cobra. Rhys sat down opposite her, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. His stormy eyes fixed on her, but this time the coldness was tempered with an unnerving intensity. "Last night at Ethelgard," he began, "I subjected you to a test, a crude, public, and deeply unpleasant test. I offer you no apology for it." Marigold stiffened. "A test, you call that? Humiliation. A test." "I do," he said, his gaze unwavering. "For the past 6 months, I have been searching for a new executive assistant. My last one was a Harvard MBA with a perfect resume, who agreed with everything I said, anticipated my every need before I voiced it, and told me I was brilliant at least 5 times a day. I fired him because he was a sycophant, a mirror, and mirrors are useless when you need to see your blind spots." He leaned back, his eyes scanning her face, analyzing her reaction. "I am surrounded by people who say yes. They say yes because of my money, my power, my reputation. They say yes because they are afraid to say no. I have come to despise the word yes." The pieces began to click into place in Marigold's mind, forming a picture so bizarre she could hardly believe it. "So you go to restaurants and you intentionally spill wine on yourself and demand the staff kneel just to see who will refuse?" "Not exactly," he said. "The wine spill was a fortunate accident, an opportunity. But the principle is the same. I create pressure cooker situations to see how people react. I need someone by my side who is not intimidated by me. Someone whose moral compass is fixed, not one that spins towards wealth and power. Someone who, when faced with an unreasonable tyrannical demand from their supposed superior, has the fortitude to look them in the eye and say, 'No.'" He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "You, Miss Penrose, are the first person in a very long time who has passed my test." Marigold stared at him, speechless. A maelstrom of emotion swirled within her: anger at his methods, shock at his revelation, and a bewildering, reluctant understanding of his twisted logic. "And what happens now?" she finally asked. "Do I get a gold star, a pat on the back for not debasing myself?" Rhys's smile widened slightly. It was the first time she had seen a hint of genuine, non-cruel expression on his face. "No," he said. "You get a job offer." He slid a sleek black folder across the obsidian desk. "I am offering you the position of my executive assistant. Your duties will be demanding. The hours will be long. You will be my gatekeeper, my scheduler, my shadow. You will be privy to information that could make or break global markets. In return, you will be compensated accordingly." Marigold tentatively opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the bottom was a salary figure. She had to read it twice. The number was so large it seemed to have too many zeros. It was more than she could hope to make in 10 years. It was enough to pay for her mother's medical care for the rest of her life, to pay off her tuition, to buy them a comfortable home, to finally breathe. It was freedom printed in black ink on a piece of paper. And it was being offered by the man who had tried to grind her dignity into the dust just last night. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. She looked up from the paper, her eyes meeting his. "You think you can buy my integrity, the very thing you claim to admire." "No," he said, his voice serious again. "I'm not buying it. I'm hiring it. I want your no working for me. I need it. Reese Capital needs it. I need someone in the room who will tell me when my ideas are terrible, when I'm being a tyrant, when I'm about to make a catastrophic mistake. Your job is not to serve me coffee. Your job is to challenge me." He stood up and walked back to the window, once again looking down at the city. "The car is waiting for you downstairs, Miss Penrose. It will take you home. The offer is on the table. You have 24 hours to decide. If you accept, your first day is tomorrow. If you decline," he turned to look at her one last time, "I will understand completely. And I will of course ensure Ethelgard rehires you with a significant raise and a personal apology from Mr. Dubois. Either way, you will not be left with nothing." He had thought of everything. He had her trapped not by force, but by a twisted form of generosity. Marigold closed the folder. Her mind was reeling. Could she work for this man? This brilliant, manipulative, monstrous man? Could she take his money, knowing how he had treated her? But then she thought of her mother's tired smile, of the stack of bills on her kitchen table. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. It was about survival. It was about taking the weapon of the man who tried to break her and using it to build a better life. She stood up, her decision made. It wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic move on a new, far more dangerous chessboard. "I don't need 24 hours, she said, her voice clear and firm. "I accept. On one condition." Grayson Reese raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. "And what is that?" "You will apologize," Marigold said. "Not to me. I don't need it. You will go back to Ethelgard, and you will apologize to the entire staff for your behavior. You will let them see that even a king can be wrong." For a long moment, Grayson Reese just stared at her. An empire of thoughts seemed to move behind his eyes. Marigold held his gaze, refusing to back down. This was her first act in her new role. Her first no in a sea of his expected yeses. Finally, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "Welcome to Reese Capital, Ms. Penrose," he said. "I'll have Genevieve schedule my dinner at Ethelgard for this evening." Marigold's first week at Reese Capital was a baptism by fire. The opulent office that had seemed like a kingdom now felt like a gilded cage, and Grayson Reese was its mercurial warden. He was demanding, exacting, and possessed an intellect so sharp it was unnerving. He moved through a world of billion-dollar deals and geopolitical strategy with the ease of a shark navigating ocean currents, and he expected her to keep up. She was inundated with information. She learned to decipher complex financial reports, manage a schedule that spanned 4 continents, and act as a firewall between Reese and the legion of people who wanted a piece of his time, money, or power. The job was a vertical learning curve, and the pressure was immense. Yet she thrived. Her mind, trained in the logic and precision of architecture, found a strange satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos of Reese's world. She was efficient, organized, and most importantly, she was not afraid of him. True to his word, Reese had gone to Ethelgard. He had booked the entire restaurant for a staff appreciation dinner. paid for it himself, and delivered a short, formal but unequivocal apology for his conduct, Mr. Dubois had nearly fainted. The story became a legend among the city's service industry. For Marigold, it was a crucial concession, a leveling of the playing field before the game had even begun. Their dynamic was unlike anything the company had ever seen. She was the only person who spoke to him without a tremor in her voice. "That acquisition strategy is too aggressive," she told him during a board meeting presentation, pointing to a flaw in his projections. A stunned silence fell over the room. The vice president stared at her as if she'd just sprouted a second head. Reese paused, considered her point, and after a tense moment nodded. "She's right. Rework the numbers." She became known as the No Woman among the senior staff. Some resented her seeing her as an unqualified upstart with an inexplicable hold over the CEO. Others, the more astute ones, watched her with a mixture of fear and respect. One person who fell firmly into the former category was Conrad Jennings, the executive vice president of mergers and acquisitions. Jennings was a slick, pedigreed man in his late 40s with a snake-like charm and an ambition that was poisonous. He had always seen himself as Reese's natural successor and viewed Marigold's sudden appearance as a personal affront. He couldn't understand how a former waitress had become the CEO's most trusted confidant. "Quite the career jump," he said to Marigold one afternoon, cornering her by the coffee station. His smile was all teeth. "From serving canapés to advising on corporate strategy, one has to wonder what special skills you brought to the table." Marigold met his condescending gaze without flinching. "The ability to tell the difference between a good idea and a bad one, Mr. Jennings. You should try it sometime." She walked away, leaving him sputtering with indignation. From that moment, she knew she had made a dangerous enemy. Despite the corporate intrigue, the money was changing her life. She moved her mother into a spacious, light-filled apartment in a building with a 24-hour concierge and access to the best doctors. For the first time, Anya Penrose was not just comfortable but cared for in a way Marigold had only ever dreamed of. The relief and gratitude in her mother's eyes made every tense meeting, every long night at the office, worth it. "He sounds like a very complicated man, this Mr. Reese," Anja said one evening as Marigold described her day. "He is," Marigold admitted. "He's ruthless and brilliant and lonely, I think. He lives in that penthouse above the office. He has no family, no real friends, just work." A strange, almost imperceptible bond was forming between them. It wasn't friendship, and it certainly wasn't warmth. It was a partnership forged in mutual respect. He respected her spine. She respected his genius. He would often work late, and she would stay the two of them existing in the silent bubble of the penthouse office as the city glittered below. During one such late night while finalizing a deal with a Japanese tech firm, Reese seemed unusually pensive. "My father was a steel worker," he said out of nowhere, staring out the window. "He worked his entire life in a mill in Pittsburgh. He believed in honest work, in loyalty to the company. When the mill was bought out by a conglomerate, they automated his entire division. He was laid off at 55. Too old to retrain, too young to retire. It broke him." Marigold listened, surprised by the personal revelation. "I swore I would never be like him." Reese continued, his voice low. "I would never be a victim of the system. I would be the system. I would be the one who owned the mills, not the one who was crushed by them." It was the first glimpse Marigold had into the man behind the myth, the wound that drove the engine of his ambition. It didn't excuse his cruelty, but it explained it. He saw the world as a brutal zero-sum game, and he was determined to be the one who won, no matter the cost. But his past was a double-edged sword. As he had clawed his way to the top, He had undoubtedly left a trail of wreckage. And in a company full of men like Conrad Jennings, any piece of that wreckage could be used as a weapon. Jennings, stewing in his resentment, decided to find that weapon. He couldn't accept that Marigold's rise was based on merit. He was convinced she had some kind of leverage over Reese, some hidden secret. He hired a private investigator, a discreet and ruthless man named Fisher, to dig into every aspect of Marigold Penrose's life. "I want to know everything," Jennings instructed Fisher in a hushed meeting. "Where she came from, her family, her school records, any hint of scandal. And while you're at it, dig into her family. Parents, grandparents, who are the Penroses?" Jennings assumed he would find some petty dirt, something he could use to discredit her. What he would uncover, however, was far more explosive than he could have ever imagined. It was a ghost from Grayson Reese's past, a name buried under years of corporate takeovers and legal paperwork, a name that would connect the waitress from Queens to the billionaire from Pittsburgh in a way that would threaten to burn Reese Capital to the ground. The name was Dmitri Petrov, Marigold's father. The file landed on Conrad Jennings's desk with a soft thud. The private investigator Fisher had been thorough. It was a detailed history of the Penrose family, tracing their journey from Eastern Europe to the United States. Most of it was mundane immigration records, old addresses, Anya Penrose's medical history. Jennings scanned it with growing disappointment. There was nothing here. No scandal, no leverage. Then he reached the final section, a profile on Marigold's father, Dmitri Petrov. Dmitri had passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. He was an engineer, a brilliant one by all accounts. In the late 1990s, he had founded a small but innovative robotics company called Innovate Dynamics. The company specialized in advanced automation software, and for a few years, it was poised to be a major player in the tech industry. Jennings read on his pulse, quickening. Innovate Dynamics had been the target of a hostile takeover in 2003. The acquiring company was a then-aggressive, up-and-coming investment firm. The takeover had been brutal. The firm had bought up the company's debt, initiated a proxy battle, and forced Dmitri Petrov out of the company he had built from scratch. The firm then liquidated Innovate's most valuable patents and absorbed the rest, leaving the company a hollow shell. Dmitri, bound by a non-compete clause and stripped of his life's work, was financially and professionally ruined. He never recovered. Jennings's hands trembled as he read the name of the investment firm that had orchestrated the takeover. It was Reese Capital, and the young, ruthless financier who had personally led the charge, the man who had crushed Dmitri Petrov's dream, was a 30-year-old Grayson Reese. Jennings leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. This was it. This was the atomic bomb he had been looking for. It was perfect. Reese, in his arrogant quest for an incorruptible assistant, had unwittingly hired the daughter of the very man he had destroyed on his climb to the top. Did Reese know Jennings highly doubted it? Penrose was not an uncommon name. Reese had probably never made the connection. And Marigold. Did she know also unlikely? She would have been a child when it all happened. She probably only remembered her father as a broken, struggling man, without knowing the specific architect of his downfall. Conrad Jennings held the key to everything. He could destroy Marigold's career by revealing she was the daughter of a past business victim, framing her as a corporate spy seeking revenge. Better yet, he could destroy Reese's trust in her, shattering the strange bond between them. He could expose Reese as a hypocrite who preached integrity while being haunted by the ghosts of those he'd trampled. He decided to play his hand carefully. First, he would plant the seed of doubt in Reese's mind. Then, he would deliver the killing blow to Marigold. He requested a private meeting with Reese. "Grayson, I have some concerns about Ms. Penrose." He began, his tone grave and solicitous. "Her access is unprecedented. Are we certain we've done our due diligence? Her background seems a little thin." Reese looked up from his work, his eyes cold. "Is there a point to this, Conrad?" "I'm just saying," Jennings pressed on. "For someone in her position, we know remarkably little about her family, her history. It could be a security risk. Her history is that she was a waitress who had the courage to tell me no." Reese retorted, his voice sharp with dismissal. "That is all the due diligence I require. If you have a legitimate concern, bring it to me. If not, get back to work." Jennings backed out of the office, his smile unwavering. The seed was planted. Reese's dismissal was defensive. He had touched a nerve. Now for Marigold. He waited until the end of the day, when Reese had already left for a dinner meeting. He found Marigold in her office, a smaller glass-walled space adjacent to Reese's, where she was reviewing documents. "Marigold, a moment of your time," he asked, closing the door behind him. She looked up, her expression wary. "What is it, Mr. Jennings?" He placed a single photocopied page on her desk. It was the final page of the Innovate Dynamics acquisition summary, detailing the final transfer of assets to Reese Capital, signed by Grayson Reese. Highlighted in yellow was the name of Innovate's founder, Dmitry Petrov. Marigold stared at the page, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this? That?" Jennings said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Is the story of how your boss, the great man of integrity, built his empire. He did it by destroying your father." The color drained from Marigold's face. She picked up the paper, her hand shaking as she read the details. "Innovate Dynamics. Hostile takeover." She remembered the name of her father's company, of course. She also remembered the years that followed its collapse, the hushed, pained conversations between her parents, the sudden move to a smaller apartment, the way the light had slowly gone out of her father's eyes. He had always been vague about the details, too proud or too wounded to explain what had happened. He had only ever said, "Big fish eat little fish, Lenotchka. That is the way of the world." And Grayson Reese was the biggest fish of all. "He targeted your father's company." Jennings continued pressing his advantage. "He bled it dry, took his patents, and left him with nothing. And now he has you, his daughter, working as his right hand. The irony is almost poetic, don't you think?" Marigold felt a wave of dizziness, the office tilting around her. The abstract painting in Reese's office, the swirl of dark blues and violent crimson, flashed in her mind. It looked like a hostile takeover. It looked like destruction. Every interaction she'd had with Reese now felt tainted. His lectures on integrity, his story about his own father, his supposed respect for her defiance. Was it all a lie? A sick, twisted game played by a man with a guilty conscience, or even worse, did he not even remember? Was her father's ruin just another forgotten footnote in his conquest? Jennings watched her, savoring her anguish. "I thought you should know," he said smoothly. "A man like that doesn't deserve your loyalty. He deserves to be exposed." He was hoping to turn her into his weapon, to have her be the one to leak the story to the press. But he had fundamentally misjudged Marigold Penrose. He had mistaken her shock for weakness. Marigold slowly lowered the paper, her expression unreadable. The initial wave of pain and betrayal began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. This wasn't just about her father's ghost anymore. This was about power. Jennings had given her a weapon not to use against Reese for revenge, but to understand the very nature of the man she worked for. She stood up, her composure returning with an unnerving speed. She looked Conrad Jennings dead in the eye. "Thank you for this information, Conrad," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You can leave now." Jennings was taken aback. This wasn't the emotional breakdown he had expected. "But what are you going to do?" "That is none of your concern," she replied, her voice like ice. "Your little game is over. Now get out of my office." There was a new authority in her voice, an echo of the man she worked for. Shaken and confused, Jennings retreated. Marigold stood alone in the silence of the office, the damning piece of paper in her hand. She now understood the system Reese had spoken of, the one he had wanted to become. It was a system that had crushed her family, and she was standing right in the heart of it. She could run, she could resign, take the money she'd earned, and disappear. Or she could stay. She could walk into the lion's den, look the lion in the eye, and confront him with the sins of his past. She straightened her blazer and walked towards the private elevator, heading not down to the street, but up to the penthouse. The time for serving and advising was over. The time for a reckoning had begun. The private elevator opened into the penthouse, which was dark save for the constellations of city lights beyond the windows. Grayson Reese stood as a silhouette against the skyline, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned his expression, a mask of guarded tension. "I thought you'd gone home, Miss Penrose," he said. Marigold walked towards him, the sound of her heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the vast room. She stopped and held out the single sheet of paper Jennings had given her. "Innovate Dynamics," she said, her voice clear and cold. "Does the name mean anything to you?" Reese looked from the paper to her face. He didn't feign ignorance. A flicker of weary recognition crossed his features as he took in the details of the hostile takeover. "Yes," he answered, his voice even. "It was one of my first major acquisitions. The founder was a man named Dmitry Petrov." He said the name, looking directly at her, acknowledging the truth he knew was coming. "He was my father," Marigold stated. The words were not an accusation, but a fact that landed with the force of a judgment, opening a chasm between them, filled with the ghosts of his ambition. Reese closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had not known. The genuine shock on his face was undeniable. He had tested hired and come to respect the daughter of a man he had professionally destroyed, all without ever making the connection. "I see," he said softly. He gestured to a pair of armchairs. "Marigold, please sit." It was the first time he had used her first name, a jarringly intimate gesture in a moment of utter fracture. She remained standing. "I prefer to stand." He gave a grim nod, accepting her terms. Leaning against his bar, he stripped himself of the usual props of his power. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she replied, her voice gaining a sharp, angry edge. "I want to know how you built an empire on the ruins of good men. How you can stand in this tower and preach integrity when your foundation is built on the wreckage of my family." Reese met her fury without flinching. "I won't tell you it was anything other than what it was." He began, his tone measured and devoid of excuses. "It was a corporate execution. Your father was a brilliant engineer but a poor businessman. He was over-leveraged, holding patents the world needed, but which he couldn't bring to market. I saw a weakness, and I exploited it. It was ruthless, and from a purely financial perspective, a massive success." "A success?" Marigold's voice cracked with a decade of suppressed grief and anger. "My father died a broken man because of you. He lost everything: his company, his passion, his will. He spent his last years doing freelance repair work, from a garage just to keep food on our table. That is the true legacy of your success." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. For the first time, Marigold saw the Titan as something else, a man burdened by his own history. "When I was 30, he said, his voice dropping low, "I saw business as a war, and in war there are casualties. I told myself it wasn't personal, that men like your father were an acceptable cost for progress." He looked up, and the weariness in his eyes was profound. "But it's always personal. There is always a Dmitri Petrov, a family, a daughter. I did not know it was you, Marigold. I swear I did not know. And if you had," she pressed, "would you have just demanded I kneel a little bit longer?" The barb hit its mark. The man who destroyed Innovate Dynamics was younger, hungrier. I became the very system that crushed my own father, a machine that doesn't see the faces of the people it grinds up. I have no excuse for what I did. Only an explanation. He paused, his gaze direct and raw. "You changed the equation. The day you said no to me, you reintroduced the human cost. Conrad Jennings gave you this, assuming you would use it to destroy me. And you can—" He admitted, offering her the ultimate power. "A story like this would be a firestorm. It would cost me everything I've built." He stood before her, utterly vulnerable, his empire balanced on the edge of her decision. Marigold looked at him, the anger in her chest still burning hot. But revenge felt small, a crude and unsatisfying tool. To destroy him would be to become him, to win the game by his brutal rules. "Destroying you is not the answer," she said, her voice regaining its unwavering strength. "That would be your move, not mine." A flicker of disbelief, of hope, crossed his face. "Then what?" "Atonement," Marigold declared. "You owe a debt, not to me, to my father's memory. You're going to start a foundation." She saw the path forward now, a design more meaningful than any building. The Petrov Foundation for Ethical Innovation. It will fund brilliant engineers like my father, protecting them from predators. It will champion creation over destruction. She stepped forward, her authority absolute. "You will fund it with an endowment that will last for generations. You will sit on the board. But I will be the chairwoman. My father's name will be on the building, and my hand will be the one guiding its mission." It was an audacious, brilliant move. She wasn't asking for reparations. She was seizing power, demanding he use his wealth to build a legacy that was the very antithesis of his own. Grayson Reese stared at her, shock giving way to a look of profound awe. She had taken the worst moment of his past and was forcing him to turn it into his only chance at a meaningful future. Slowly, he extended his hand. It wasn't a handshake between equals. It was a gesture of complete and total surrender to her terms. "It will be done," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Whatever you need, it's yours." Marigold looked at his outstretched hand, but she didn't take it. The reckoning was over. The work was just beginning. The announcement of the Petrov Foundation landed like a thunderclap within Reese Capital. Publicly, it was a bold philanthropic move. Internally, it was understood as a seismic shift in the company's very soul. The first casualty of this new era was Conrad Jennings. Reese summoned him, and the meeting was brutally brief. Jennings was escorted from the building by security, a man undone by a scheme that had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Marigold transitioned seamlessly into her role as chairwoman. She left the gilded cage of the executive floor for an entire level of her own, a blank slate that Reese had endowed with a staggering sum. She designed an office filled with light and collaboration, the antithesis of his own stark penthouse, and staffed it with a team who shared her vision. She was no longer managing a man's empire. She was building her own. The Foundation's mission was a direct rebuke of the predatory capitalism that had destroyed her father. Instead of hostile takeovers, it offered support. The first grant went to 2 young engineers developing revolutionary prosthetic limb technology, a project that championed creation over destruction. The dynamic between Marigold and Reese settled into a complex equilibrium. They were partners bound by the difficult truth of their shared past. He was the silent benefactor, attending quarterly meetings where he sat and listened as she commanded the room. He watched from a distance as she built a powerful legacy from the ruins of his past, and in doing so forced him to truly atone. Months later, he found her working late in her new office, the space humming with hopeful energy. "He would have been proud of you," Reese said quietly from the doorway. Marigold looked up from a set of blueprints for a new tech incubator. "Yes," she said simply. "He would have been. I often wonder what he would have thought of me," Reese mused, stepping into the room. "He would have respected your mind and despised your lack of a soul." Marigold replied, her honesty as sharp and clean as ever. Reese absorbed the blow with a grim nod. "He wouldn't have been wrong. You didn't just ask for an apology, Marigold," he said, looking at the plans spread across her desk. "You demanded I build a cathedral to atone for my sins. It's the most architecturally sound deal I've ever made." A small, genuine smile touched Marigold's lips. "My father taught me to build things that last." In the end, the story was not about a waitress who toppled a billionaire. It was about a woman who refused to be broken, who looked into the heart of the system that had wronged her, and instead of seeking to destroy it, chose to redesign it. Grayson Reese, the man who demanded the world kneel, had finally learned the value of building something up, and it took a quiet, defiant no from the daughter of a ghost to teach him how. The shock was not that she had stood up to him. The shock was that in doing so, she had saved them both. The story of Marigold Penrose and Grayson Reese is a stark reminder that true strength isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the courage to uphold one's dignity in the face of immense pressure. It shows that integrity is a currency that cannot be bought or devalued. Marigold didn't just win a confrontation, she rewrote the rules of the game. She transformed an act of humiliation into a legacy of hope, proving that one person's refusal to bend can create ripples that change the very structure of power. Her journey from an invisible waitress to the architect of a better future challenges us to ask ourselves, what do we stand for when we have nothing? And what do we build when we are given everything? If this story of defiance, resilience, and unexpected redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with others who appreciate powerful storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the hidden heroes and extraordinary twists of fate that shape our world. Thank you for listening.